Welcome back to the Sad Crime Channel. Today's story is about a betrayal that did not end well. This tale invites reflection on the consequences that some of our actions can bring upon ourselves and others. In this case, an affair unfortunately became the start of a tragic chain of events. I invite you to listen to the details of a story that intertwines the lives of Mark and Jennair Gerardots and Meredith Chapman. Meredith was born on January 31st, 1985, in Newark, Delaware. She was ambitious, energetic, and creative. Not only did she graduate from the University of Delaware, but she later became the director of the marketing department there and a lecturer. As a young woman, she held a managerial position and oversaw a team of people. Before that, she worked for 2 years as a television reporter. Meredith was always deeply involved in politics as well. For some time, she was employed as a communications and external relations manager in the House of Representatives, and at just 32 years old, she ran for the Senate in Delaware in 2016. Although she wasn't elected, her accomplishments were impressive and admired. She was even included in Delaware's 40 Under 40 list of successful individuals. Meredith was very active on social media, regularly posting photos and videos, and was always seen with a broad smile on her face. In 2009, she married Councilman Luke Chapman and actively supported him in his political career. In 2017, Meredith met Mark Gerardots. At the time, she was interviewing him for the position of creative director. Initially, Mark had reservations because Meredith was 15 years younger than him, and she would be his direct supervisor. However, the two hit it off immediately. Mark was impressed by Meredith's professionalism and experience. He said she was very mature for her age and found her to be an intriguing woman overall. Ultimately, Meredith offered Mark the job. At that time, Mark was living with his wife, Jennair, in South Carolina. Together, they discussed the idea of Mark's relocation and new job offer, and they agreed it was a great opportunity. They decided that Mark would move to Delaware immediately while his wife would handle the paperwork for their house rental and join him later. Not long after, Mark received another invitation for a job interview, this time from a company in Colorado, where he had also applied. This position was also very promising for his career. Since Mark hadn't officially informed the University of Delaware that he had accepted their offer, he decided to fly to Colorado for the interview and evaluate which job would be more advantageous for him. However, halfway through the second interview, he decided he wanted to take the job in Delaware and see what the future held there. While still at the airport, he wrote to Meredith, letting her know he accepted her offer and would be moving to Delaware. Mark started his new job at the university and settled into his new surroundings. He was greatly impressed by Meredith, both as a boss and as a woman. So, when one evening she invited him out for a drink, Mark immediately agreed without much thought. The meeting lasted several hours, during which the pair discussed everything under the sun, forming an instant connection. They felt as though they had known each other for years. Mark opened up to Meredith, even sharing how deeply he had been affected by the deaths of his parents and brother, something he had never talked about before. Mark was also honest about his marriage. He didn't hide the fact that he had a wife, nor did he speak negatively about his relationship. He mentioned that their love had grown cold and that they often argued. There was clear chemistry between Mark and Meredith, and their date ended in kisses. However, Mark claimed that he immediately felt terrible afterward, full of guilt. As I mentioned earlier, Meredith was also married. Her relationship with Luke had lasted 9 years by then, but according to her, things weren't going well. For some time, they had stayed together only for appearances. Meanwhile, the bond between Mark and Meredith grew stronger with each passing day. About a month after Mark's move, he confessed his love to Meredith. It turned out that she fully reciprocated his feelings. Meanwhile, as Mark's wife Jennair was finalizing their shared commitments in South Carolina, Mark was leading a second life in Delaware. It's possible that Mark was going through a midlife crisis. Meredith was something new and exciting for him. She fully appreciated his work and complimented him as a man, something he felt he wasn't getting from his wife. In January 2018, Jennair finally wrapped up all the affairs that had kept her away from her husband and was able to move to Delaware. However, she immediately noticed that something was off. Mark seemed very distant and completely changed. Jennair quickly began to suspect that there might be another woman involved. Mark and his wife met in the summer of 1986, when Mark was 18 and Jennair was 16. At the time, Jennair worked at a Taco Bell, and Mark recalls that she looked beautiful in work uniform. Both were involved in musical theater, and although she caught Mark's eye, they didn't have the chance to talk then. It wasn't until 4 years later, when they ran into each other by chance, that they started dating. Mark and his wife were complete opposites. Jennair was rebellious and curious about the world, unafraid to speak her mind, and didn't care what others thought of her. She was strong, brave, and honest. Mark, on the other hand, preferred to stay out of the spotlight and was very shy. Despite their differences, the two quickly fell in love. After just a few months of dating, they knew they wanted to be together forever and felt they were made for each other. Jennair would tell her friends that Mark was the one and that she would do anything for him. In October 1993, they got married and decided not to have children, focusing on each other and spending as much time together as possible. They got along well, frequently going on trips and hikes, and spoiling their dogs. Like any couple, they had their ups and downs, including arguments, but overall, they were a solid pair. When they started feeling the effects of a major financial crisis and their situation worsened, more conflicts began to arise between them. Jennair had a dominant personality and always needed to have the last word in arguments, which drove Mark crazy. Both worked in marketing and tried to overcome their financial troubles, but Jennair eventually lost her job and couldn't find new work. This was a huge blow for her. She struggled to accept her new reality, feeling stuck in a rut, which deeply depressed her. She was eventually diagnosed with depression. After moving to Delaware and beginning to suspect that her husband was having an affair, Jennair asked him directly if something was going on with Meredith. Mark often mentioned his boss, and Jennair was aware that Meredith was beautiful and much younger. Mark, however, denied everything, insisting that his relationship with Meredith was purely professional. Although his wife accepted his explanation, deep down she knew that Mark wasn't telling her the full truth. Determined to catch him in the act, she hired a company to hack his phone and grant her access to his texts, calls, and photos. Jennair also obtained recordings of conversations Mark had with Meredith. On Valentine's Day, February 14th, she confronted her husband, revealing that she knew everything. With such evidence, it was hard for Mark to deny it. He confessed to everything and admitted that he had fallen in love. Jennair was shocked. She had assumed that Mark was simply having an affair with Meredith because he was going through a midlife crisis and wanted a younger lover, not that there were deeper feelings involved. When Mark told her he wanted to be with Meredith, Jennair was stunned. She couldn't believe that her husband would choose a short affair over their 20-year relationship. Mark suggested that they go to couples therapy, though he admits that they probably had different goals. Jennair was trying to save their marriage, while he wanted to be sure that it couldn't be fixed. One day, while preparing for one of their therapy sessions, Mark found a listening device in his jacket. He realized then that his wife not only had access to his phone data, but also knew about every conversation he had during the day. Mark saw this as a serious invasion of his privacy, and the couple had a big argument. During this confrontation, it also came out that his wife had contacted the University of Delaware to inform them about the unprofessional relationship between Meredith and Mark. She had also informed Meredith's husband, Luke, that his wife was cheating on him. Despite the tense situation, things were temporarily calmed down. Jennair promised to stop spying on Mark, and he agreed to go to another therapy session, though it seemed he was already set on ending the marriage. After 3 sessions, Mark concluded that he could no longer stay with Jennair. He told her that as soon as he obtained residency status in Delaware, which would happen in a few months in May, he would file for divorce. Meanwhile, Meredith had ended her relationship with Luke. The pair split amicably, with no hard feelings. Both agreed that their relationship had run its course, and there was no point in continuing. Since the university administration had found out about Meredith and Mark's relationship, both of them decided to start looking for new jobs. In April, Meredith joined Villanova University as the assistant vice president for marketing and creative services in Pennsylvania. She was the first to move to the area and rented a house, with Mark planning to join her later. They decided to live in Radnor, a town on the outskirts of Philadelphia known for being wealthy, quiet, and safe. Meanwhile, Jennair was filled with rage and sorrow. Not only had her husband left her for a younger woman, but she was also alone in a new city, without friends or family. Having moved there mainly because of Mark, she struggled to cope with the separation and her jealousy toward Mark's new partner. Despite everything, she still hoped that Mark would return to her and that things could go back to the way they were. Jennair told Mark that she would sign the divorce papers only if he continued living with her and spending time together until May. This included going on walks or having dinner with her. Although this arrangement seemed strange, Mark agreed, and for a while they got along reasonably well. However, one evening, Mark found another listening device in his jacket. This discovery infuriated him, as his wife had promised to stop eavesdropping on his conversations. The incident led to a massive argument during which Mark, in anger, broke a table and said hurtful things to her. As a result, Jennair nearly jumped from the 7th floor. At this point, Mark became genuinely concerned about his wife's mental state and suggested she seek professional help. Jennair followed his advice and began seeing a psychiatrist regularly. Over time, Mark believed that she was gradually accepting that their relationship was over and that divorce was inevitable. He thought that they could part on amicable terms. On April 23, 2018, Meredith posted a photo on Instagram standing in front of Villanova University. The caption indicated that she was excited about this new chapter in her life and where she was. On the same day, Mark was supposed to meet his wife at a restaurant to discuss the final details of their divorce. He arrived first, but she texted him, saying she was late because she had taken the wrong route. 10 minutes later, she sent another message, telling him she wasn't coming and to go home. Then, his wife sent Mark a photo of trash, including a used condom. Mark immediately knew what the photo meant. She had gone to Meredith's house and rifled through her trash. He received 3 more messages from his wife, where she told him he had ruined her life and that she hoped he would never find happiness again. In the last message she wrote, "Goodbye, Mark." Panicked, Mark tried to reach Meredith, but she didn't respond. He feared that his wife had confronted Meredith and that Meredith wasn't replying because she was angry. Mark decided to drive to Meredith's house. When he arrived and looked through the window, he saw Meredith lying face down on the kitchen floor. Mark rushed inside and saw blood on her leg. Meredith wasn't moving, and she appeared to not be breathing. Mark was in shock and ran out of the house in panic. A neighbor, alarmed by Mark's behavior, entered the house to see what was going on. He saw what Mark had: a woman lying on the floor. The neighbor also noticed that Meredith still had her keys in her hand, indicating she had been attacked immediately after entering the house. He checked for a pulse, but couldn't find one. Meredith was already dead. Mark, still in a daze, went back inside and discovered another person lying in the living room, dressed entirely in black. After a moment, he realized he was looking at his wife Jennair's body. Initially, the police couldn't locate the weapon, so they considered the possibility that a third party had attacked both women. Mark, of course, became the primary suspect, especially since he was behaving strangely, yelling at the officers and being unusually hostile. However, when they finally began moving the bodies, investigators found the gun beneath Jennair. It had been fired twice. Mark was taken in for questioning, where he recounted the entire story to the police, showing them the messages his wife had sent him while he waited for her at the restaurant. Everything began to fall into place. During the investigation, police determined that Jennair had headed toward Radnor in the early afternoon. By 2:20 p.m., she had stopped at a gas station near Meredith's house. After going through Meredith's trash, she hid inside the house, waiting for Meredith to return from work. Meredith likely arrived between 5 and 6 p.m., at which point Jennair shot her. After sending Mark the 3 messages, including the final goodbye, Jennair took her own life. The police also found a rented car parked near Meredith's home, which Jennair had used that day.
2 women found shot in the head in this Radnor Township home, police say, appears to be the result of a love affair with a tragic end.
This was a calculated, planned attack.
One of the victims is 33-year-old Meredith Chapman, a former candidate for state senate in Delaware and a recently hired Villanova assistant vice president. Sometime after 5 o'clock yesterday, Chapman walked into her Lowry's Lane home. Police say she was walking into a trap. Chapman's alleged lover's wife had broken into the home and was waiting inside with a gun.
There were emails and text messages indicating what she planned to do.
The wife, Jennair Gerardots of Delaware, killed herself after killing Chapman and before Gerardots' husband arrived at the home and discovered both of their bodies.
In the car, a pair of binoculars, ammunition, gloves, and earplugs were found. It turned out that Jennair had rented the vehicle 10 days earlier. A neighbor also reported seeing a woman 2 days before the incident, lurking near Meredith's house and observing it through binoculars. Mark was devastated. He discovered that Jennair had been planning everything for some time. He found bank statements, phone bills, and her search history on the computer. After checking his wardrobe, he realized that all his jackets and coats had listening devices sewn into them. Jennair had been regularly retrieving data from these devices, reinstalling them, and sewing them back into his clothing. Later, she would listen to the recordings and transcribe all the conversations between Mark and his lover into a notebook. 12 notebooks were found, containing transcriptions of their conversations. Jennair had even opened a separate bank account to exclusively purchase items used to track Mark's every move. She bought, among other things, a lock-picking kit, which she likely used to break into her husband's office, spy software installed on all his computers, and even a DNA testing kit to collect samples from his clothing. She also installed GPS trackers in both her husband's car and Meredith's, tracking their locations for weeks. She named the device in Mark's car Lying Jerk and called Meredith's tracker by a vulgar insult. Of course, Jennair had access to her husband's phone. She downloaded thousands of messages the couple had exchanged on Snapchat. As early as March 20th, she purchased a gun and visited a shooting range several times, likely for practice. The last time she was at the range was just hours before the incident. Mark found a letter at home, written by his wife a few weeks before the planned crime. In the letter, Jennair wrote about how much she enjoyed being a wife and life partner, that she found fulfillment in caring for her family. But there was also a passage stating that Mark and Meredith couldn't get away with what they had done, that she wanted justice and deserved respect. She expressed that she needed control and had to take matters into her own hands. In February, Jennair had used the Nextdoor app, first asking the local community for a recommendation for a good divorce attorney. A month later, she asked for a recommendation for marriage therapy specialists. Police later spoke with her psychiatrist, asking if she had noticed any alarming signs in her behavior. Interestingly, the specialist said no and claimed she had appeared to be coming to terms with the divorce, talking about starting a new life and moving out of Delaware. However, she had initially been diagnosed with PTSD, triggered by her husband's infidelity and the impending divorce. Jennair had also been treated for depression for years. A specialist, whom Mark consulted with later, after finding the letter his wife left behind, suggested that she might have shown signs of borderline personality disorder. It seems that she was devastated, angry and jealous, but at the same time she was able to convince most people around her, including Mark, that she was slowly starting to cope with the difficult situation. Mark feels somewhat responsible for what happened. He believes that if it weren't for him, Meredith would still be alive, and that he should have died instead of her. He admits he feels guilty for pushing his wife to a point where she believed her only choice was to eliminate his lover. Mark regrets not recognizing his wife's deteriorating mental state sooner. He says he has forgiven her for what she did to him, but can never forgive her for taking another person's life. Mark sold everything he owned and moved away. He now lives in San Diego and works in marketing for a luxury hotel chain. He has written a book about the case and regularly runs a blog, trying to raise awareness about mental health issues. However, his work has received mixed reactions. The case has sparked significant media attention and online discussions. Some blame Mark for what happened, pointing out that if he had stayed faithful, or at least ended one relationship before starting another, the tragedy could have been avoided. Others argue that Meredith brought it upon herself by pursuing a married man and breaking up a long-term relationship. Some believe Jennair is solely responsible, while others feel she was provoked. Mental health issues and the effects of traumatic events on human behavior have also become key topics of discussion. Many highlight that Meredith's husband was also betrayed, yet he handled the situation with grace. Emotions run high in this case, and the fact remains that 2 women lost their lives. At the time of their deaths, Jennair was 47 years old and Meredith was 33. What are your thoughts on this case? Feel free to share in the comments. Thank you for listening. Until next time.